Once I reach 1,000 subscribers, I will always have a live chat on the first Friday of the month at 8 p.m. So please subscribe, click on the bell, and let's get 1,000 subscribers very soon. Good morning and welcome back to Planet Althistory. Today we are going to discuss what if Syagrius re-established the Western Roman Empire. Not much is known about Syagrius. The only main source we have is from Gregory of Tours. And as always, one main source is very problematic. Syagrius apparently lived from 430 until 486, or 487, or 493, or 494. So the date of his death remains unclear. What is known about him is that he was the military commander of a Roman rump state in Northern Gaul, which is also called Kingdom of Soissons. He inherited his position as military commander from his father, Aegidius. Aegidius was a very loyal defender of Rome and of the Emperor Majorian, and his son Syagrius was called Rex Romanorum by Gregory of Tours. So we can be sure that if Syagrius existed, he was probably a very loyal person to the Roman cause. Even until the very end and the diplomatic problems that arose from Odoacar, who ruled Italy, Syagrius he still stated that he merely ruled a Roman province. But of course this province was very independent. Syagrius lost the battle against the emerging king Clovis I of the Franks, and this meant the end of the Roman authority in France, and it marked the rise of the powerful Frankish Empire. But what if this never happened? What if Syagrius re-established the Western Roman Empire? First of all, it won't be Syagrius himself who will re-establish the Western Roman Empire, and also second of all, he as well as some of his successors, they won't call themselves king or emperor yet, because it would be against the Roman tradition to somehow take some titles on their own. Instead, the magister militium would need to be inherited by his successors, and the title of Magister might actually transform into something similar as Caesar or Rex in OTL. From Caesar we have the German word Kaiser, and from Rex we have the French word le roi. The word duke also derived from an old Roman military position, so it won't be far-fetched to assume that Magister would become some type of duke or king even. Coming back to the point of divergence, Clovis I was a very capable man, but if he lost, the Frankish kingdom would fracture, and worse, if he died in the battlefield, Syagrius might even stood a chance to take back some of the former Roman lands. By the time of the Battle of Syagrius, Clovis I had already 2 sons, and they were not adults. Moreover, with the very complex family relationships and many rivals as a Frankish king, it would indeed be a cakewalk for Syagrius to take step by step back some of former Roman territories. A few years would be needed to do that, but a few important years, which in return would benefit the Visigoths in a way, who would never have lost against the Franks. The Ripuarian Franks would still have some degree of independence, but on the other side of the Rhine. And then on the main side of the Rhine you would have again some type of Roman leadership. Syagrius' next step would probably be to take Lugdunum, which is also called nowadays Lyon. Why? Well, there are 2 reasons. First of all, his family came from this city, and second of all, Burgundy had a lot of trouble. They were constantly under pressure from the neighbors, so it's easy to imagine that they might get defeated by Syagrius. So far, Syagrius wouldn't have to deal with the Visigoths, as Alaric II was in OTL a very cautious leader, and he negotiated many treaties which he in some ways also tried to keep. He was intimidated by the Franks, so seeing Syagrius expand in a similar manner might also make him somewhat afraid of Syagrius. However, if we extend the rule of Alaric II a bit, we might see more usurpers, rebellions coming from the local population. Alaric II was also an Arian. The rest of the population was mostly Catholic. If Syagrius' main goal was to keep Rome and Roman tradition somehow alive, he would probably wait for an opportunity to hit and take back Aquitania and Gallia Norbensensis. This would ultimately create a problem with the Ostrogoths. And he might not totally get all of Gallia back at once, however his territory would get more stable, have better borders, and Eastern Rome would certainly reconsider their relations with him, which they broke a few years prior. By the time where Justinian the Great would declare war on the Ostrogoths from 535 and 554, the successor of Syagrius from Soissons would step in and take advantage of this situation. At least all of Gallia would fall back in his hands. I don't think that Justinian would accept the success of Syagrius as an equal, but he would certainly see him as some type of representative and give him some form of recognition. Justinian established a strict separation of civil and military authority, and thus Syagrius would somehow, his son would somehow become a governor of Gallia and Germania, but not as they were way before, but just as some type of recognition, because in those years titles they meant a lot, especially if there would be still this tradition that Syagrius and his successors, they wouldn't see themselves as a leader or Roman leader, but as a servant, let's say. Surely due to Justinian's personality and his ambitions to retake all of Rome, he would also probably have some clashes with the ruler of Soissons, but he would never really try to get rid of him, because he would prove to be very beneficial. Hispania or Iberia might totally fall under the rule of Rome this time. Some parts would be administrated by the ruler of Soissons, like in the north, while the rest would come back to Byzantium, totally. But in the long run, not much would change. We are now in the alternate year of 600. The Longobards would successfully invade some parts of Italy, and the Byzantines would have to fight them off. But sure, Soissons would also deal with their own share of problems, and so slowly but surely Soissons could get tempted to take back Italy. A smart leader would be able to negotiate some type of recognition, while Justin II would be in a war with the Sassanids. He would become governor of Italia, or at least governor of Italia Padus, the Po Valley. The influence over Spain would also grow, as the Byzantine emperors were too busy with the wars in the east. And with more invasions, such as the Avars for instance, it would become more and more complicated for them to administer Spain and Italy, so Soissons would gain influence, as they would be Roman. During the Arab invasion, the Byzantine Empire could probably last a bit longer and challenge even the Arabs a bit better, and as a result, the Byzantine rule in Western North Africa could last a tiny bit longer, but to no avail, and probably Soissons will at this moment overtake Italy and Spain, while also trying to land on North Africa and actually posing some challenge to the Arabs. Byzantium could share the Greek fire technology with Soissons, and the Mediterranean Sea would never somehow become dominated by the Arabs. Iberia won't become Islamized at all, as the Arabs would never find Iberia as disunited as in OTL. While Italy would be undeveloped or underdeveloped, and destroyed by the constant wars, Iberia and Gallia would be very developed and in a similar thing as a Carolingian Renaissance might appear. Works similar to those of Gregory of Tours or Saint Isidore of Sevilla could continue and various cities would start to be repopulated again. The Hungarian invasion would pose a problem to the western border of Soissons, and the domain of Saxony would probably become disunited. Soissons, now rather a Western Roman Empire by form but not in the name yet, would be able to take back some Roman parts and make a border on the Elbe and the Danube. Later on, the Hungarians would become Christianized. The Vikings don't pose a problem, as they did in OTL, thanks to the Greek fire technology, but most of Britain would certainly be influenced by them, and pretty successfully so. So this time they would actually have a continuous presence in Britain and then start to creep in to Ireland. The Caliphate will still have a civil war, and there won't be a continuation of the Umayyads, because the Umayyad in OTL, they escaped to Spain. So the Abbasid will totally win, but they will lose vast territories this time to the Romans. I think that around 800 and 850, Soissons will eventually become an empire and become the Western Roman Empire once more. The fact that Byzantium is declining and that Soissons controls Rome, they would take actually somehow advantage of it, and the Pope would somehow crown them, or there would be any other way for them to become the emperor. When Byzantium gets pressured by Bulgaria, Western Rome would take advantage of it by actually being recognized as an equal by Byzantium. In one way or another, they would take the role of the Frankish Empire, but the culture would be very much Gallo-Roman or Neo-Roman. It would be changed, but the continuations of Roman laws, traditions and titles would still be very prevalent. Maybe also some Roman technologies would never get totally lost, or they would be transformed in one way or another. Byzantium and Western Rome would both fight the Abbasids and Muslim warriors on land mostly, but also lose some territories while winning on sea. The Slavs will continue to establish their kingdoms, and a Germanic rump state would also form somehow in northern Germany. Later on, Eastern Europe would still establish states like Moravia, Poland, Kievan Rus, and Hungary. The Abbasids would fall apart, but not so much as in OTL, and Western Rome as well as Byzantium would regain some former Roman territories once more. But this time it would be a time also of peace, at least in Gallia and Iberia, and even parts of Italy that were not so close to the Alps, for instance. And this time Italy would also evolve a little bit faster, whereas Germania Superior, or Germany or Germania, they would still be a very backwards province due to all the invasions that came in the past. Trade would become very strong, and also new ideas would start to pop up, but also a different type of Renaissance would find the necessary soil to develop, and this time this new Renaissance would come from Iberia and some cities of Gallia as well as Paris, for instance. This would be a very different time, however, for Byzantium. Byzantium would not prosper, they would not have peace. The Battle of Manzikert or an alternate type of battle will occur, and this will be the doom for Byzantium, as well as the Crusades. But this time the Crusades, they will not come into Byzantium, so they will divert and go immediately to Jerusalem, for instance. But even though the territories would be taken back and somehow belong to Byzantium, Western Rome would enforce some type of control over it. And they too would be able to push back the Caliphate with its capital in Cairo away from Libya, for instance. Rome and the Ottomans would not be butterflied away, as they would be descendants of the Turks who won the Battle of Manzikert, and actually Western Rome would become kind of opportunistic with Byzantium. The Mongols would rampage all over Europe and get as far as they did in OTL. However, Egypt would not be ruled by the Mamluks. As for Russia, they would still suffer from the same as in OTL, and the Viking Britain would at one point split from Viking Scandinavia and keep connections with Greenland and perhaps even Newfoundland. The Mongols would also make sure that Western Rome would at the end lose control of, for instance, Jerusalem, together with Byzantium. Fast forward, Western Rome might decide to expand on sea for a reason. The blocking of the trade route with India and China is still occurring. Think of it as a big empire with a peaceful core land. You have an evolving class, an evolving elite. They want luxury goods, and some private people would certainly sponsor some people to make trips around the sea. So going around Africa and then finding the Americas would definitely happen at one moment. Byzantium would slowly die off, but they would never be totally beaten by the Ottomans, as Western Rome would come to the rescue, but not because they wanna be good guys, but because they really need that Byzantium at one point would actually recognize them as the Roman Empire. And this means that the churches, they would unite, so you don't have any more Orthodoxy and Catholicism. It will become, again, once more the same. You will have eventually a reunification around 1400 and 1500, and the Roman Empire would again exist once more. Africa will be more Christians, and only some tribes would probably decide to take Islam as religion, but these tribes would be wiped out very, very fast. As the newly reformed Roman Empire would expand, they would mainly fight the Ottomans on equal terms, probably sometimes with the Hungarians and the Viking British on the sea, for instance. The allies of the Romans would be someone who is similar as the Lithuanians, or who occupies the same place as Lithuania. They would get Crimea and other parts which were Roman for some time, but not that important as of that moment. The Russians would pretty much do their own thing in the east and bite their teeth out on the Lithuanians, but just for some moments probably, while the Ottomans would expand more into Arabia, Persia, as well as Egypt. Wars on the sea would paralyze the Romans, and the Viking Brits would be able to take some colonies and inflict minor but not so long-lasting damages to the Romans. The Hungarians would be wiped out, while Poland becomes part of Lithuania. Much of Central Europe is split among the Romans and the Lithuanians, who at one point would then be at odds. The Russians, they would then become the Rome's new ally, while Lithuania could ally with the Ottomans and the Viking Brits. Taking back all of Anatolia would be out of question, as well as the Middle East and Egypt. And only with Russia as a strong ally and a lot of luck, the Romans would be able to take back Crimea, parts which belonged to Byzantium, and they would dismantle Lithuania and fragment it into different smaller independent kingdoms. But the Ottomans, they would still continue to exist and be a powerhouse in the Middle East and Persia. Africa, as well as some parts of America, they would belong to the Romans, while in the north the Viking Brits would dominate much of Canada and parts of OTL US. As for Asia, an Indian successor of Gupta would be able to survive the Mongols, and they would continue to get stronger and expand within India, but at the end they too would be at odds with the Ottomans, who would border them in this alternate timeline. Latin would evidently become the lingua franca, but it will change very, very much, but not so much as it did in OTL. Together with Sanskrit, at least in India, and probably also the Indian Ocean, you will have Chinese, and you will also have English. So I will not call it English, but it will be English, as it is more influenced by the Germanic languages, and without the Normans and without the French, there is just no English language as we know it. And I guess the Turks, or the Ottomans, they will have a very different language as well, and probably Turkish, Persian and Arabic, it will change completely in this alternate timeline. While Eastern Europe, they will have small pockets of Germanic, Slavic and Baltic, except for Russia, of course, where you will have mainly an alternate Russian. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed my video. Be sure to like and subscribe, leave a comment, support me also on Patreon, and join my forum, forum.planetalthistory.ga. Until next time on Planet Alt History.